Okay, we are on the fourth chapter. The fourth chapter. It always throws me off when they don't number them. I want to number them. That makes it feel better to me. But apprehending God, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
We are all on the same one this time. Okay, looking very good. Right. She got so excited she ran ahead last time. So
Whoops.
apprehending God.
Was there something I said?
It's always something you said, Tom, I think. Okay, so
Computer moved.
today's chapter is brief, I thought, relatively brief. And the initial scripture reference to kind of kick it off or to set the tone or theme from Psalm 34. Oh, taste and see.
I don't know why it won't stand.
So, oh, taste and see. What does that make you think of?
Eucharist.
Ah, okay, good. The Eucharist, absolutely. Anything else?
Next line, and the Lord, oh, taste and see.
Yeah, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good.
Good.
What does that make you think of? I mean, certainly there's definitely a Eucharistic element to it. You know, the Psalm, while prefiguring the Eucharist, didn't really have the Eucharist specifically in mind. So it's a very lovely poetic phrase. So what else does it bring to mind? What do you think it brought to mind to the people who, you know, prayed this or sung this for generations prior to the birth of Christ?
Manna in the desert.
Man in the desert? Yeah, I think that's a good one. Yeah. What about the phrase itself? Why, you know, we've all read the chapter now, so it's not like we're revealing it as we talk paragraph by paragraph, but this is kind of talking about a more personal experience with God rather than just kind of an intellectual understanding. But, you know, should people desire that more very personal, almost tangible connection, so why use this verse? Physical, okay. There's almost a sensual element to it, and by that I don't mean like, you know, creepy. I mean like our senses, the tasting of something.
Our five senses are how we come to know and understand our world. And we can do that also symbolically in a spiritual way.
Okay. Okay. So when we ask somebody to give it a taste, we mean both to potentially stick it in your mouth, but what do we also mean by that? Try it.
Just trying it.
Yeah, experience something firsthand. You know, taste and see that the Lord is good. A couple of things come to mind for me, and this, you know, very tangible, very, you know, sense oriented. And my mom was talking about this is how we experience the world through our senses, and I almost immediately flashed towards babies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a baby sees something with one sense, they grab it and feel another sense, and what's the very next thing they do? Stick it in their mouth. Pretty much anything a baby will stick in their mouth, because that's how they're trying to understand and relate to the world. But even today, or as adults, when we ask somebody to taste something, we usually mean a couple of things. Number one is to experience something for yourself, as though give it a try, you might like it. But in the actual like tasting, like real, you know, stick it in your mouth kind of stuff, why would we ask somebody to taste something? See if it needs something, okay? Like, hey, does this sauce need a little more salt? What else?
See if they like it.
Okay, why would they have to taste it to see if they like it?
Well, if it's food, if and even with an experience, if they don't experience something, they don't know if they like it or not.
Okay, and yet prior to experiencing something, we can make conclusions and come to judgments very easily, right?
Look at it and
If you look at something and you don't think you're going to like it, whether it's a food or an experience, you've already made up your mind at some level, right? So when somebody says taste it, it's almost to go against a judgment you've already reached. Like you don't want to taste it, but I'm trying to convince you to taste it.
I think of children, particularly school children. If you can't get them to taste it,
Okay,
you're done.
right, children, and because children aren't typically very adventurous with their food. I was a very picky eater as a child. I'm still a picky eater as an adult. And there's a bunch of stuff that just by look, I don't want it. And that is, for somebody to say, but just taste it. Sometimes it might not look appealing to us because, visually. However, there's a culinary saying that you eat first with your eyes. You ever heard that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
First. So the idea is, especially like very high level cooking involves multiple senses. Like, chefs will tell you that, you want every dish to be very balanced with the sweet and the salty and the acid and all this kind of stuff. So it's not just a singular taste, which makes it good, but it's all these different things. But also the textures matter. The smell matters because smell is related to your sense of taste, but also the way it looks.
Yeah.
Restaurants work on plating. They don't just kind of throw the food down there. Even though my great grandfather would mix everything up on his plate and eat it because it's all going to the same place anyway. What is that? Something like that. Most of us can look at something and find an appeal or be disinclined to it just by the way it looks.
You make me think of something. Your grandfather did that. I had a grandson who things could not touch.
Oh yeah. With kids, things can't touch, and so everything had to be completely separated out, right? Who knows? We've all got our little quirks. So the second thing this makes me think of, and it's more a personal thing. We are now, as we are doing this class live, just a few days from the beginning of Holy Week. And if anybody were to watch this later, who in the world knows when you're going to watch it? But we're on the Wednesday prior to Holy Week, and one of the offerings that we do here during Holy Week, at the conclusion of Holy Week, is the Great Easter Vigil. And I love the Great Easter Vigil. It is the oldest existing liturgy within the church. So what we have in the prayer book is, it's an approximation, it's an update, it's a translation, but these are liturgical texts from the 2nd and 3rd century, where the catechumens, those who had been prepared sometimes for a year or longer with theological training, with discipleship, with scripture reading, were finally allowed to stay throughout the entire church service because they were to be baptized and they could finally receive the Eucharist. So as a part of the seriousness of the faith, but also, to be perfectly honest, the danger of the times. These were times where Christianity was very underground. These were times where it was persecuted. These were times where they had enemies at every corner who would be very happy to get rid of the church or destroy it. So you didn't just leave your, you didn't just like let anybody in to anything at all, because there's a risk. So if you were serious about joining the church, well, they wanted to train you. They wanted to teach you. And you kind of had to demonstrate a little commitment. So these catechumens would be trained over the course of, say, a year. could be more, could be less, but it was very purposeful. And you could go to the first part of the church service and hear the liturgy of the word, but when it was time for the Eucharist, you were excused. And so the Great Easter Vigil was the appropriate time of the year where, in celebration of the resurrection, the catechumenates were baptized and finally brought into the fullness of church. And there's all sorts of, symbol and ritual and everything else that is attached to it. And I really like Great Easter Vigil. I like the way we do it here, especially now that we're outside the garden chapel, and we start off outside in the dark, but without flipping any light switches. The dawn just kind of breaks during the course of the service. It's really, really neat. But something that I incorporated many years ago, and this is a personal quirk, but it comes from somewhere. This was a practice of the earliest church. After the catechumenates who'd waited all year long finally got baptized and they received their first communion, they also then received milk and honey. My mom looks confused. She might not have heard that. Milk and honey.
Oh, okay. I did not hear that correctly.
Intended to be symbolic of the promise to Abraham that they would be brought into a land flowing with milk and honey. And so now, as becoming a member of Christ Church, you too are a part of the promise and brought into an eternal land flowing with milk and honey, meaning a land full of good things, a land full of plenty, a land full of resources, a land full of what you need rather than being hungry or scarcity. But the kingdom of God was a place where all of the good things were there in abundance of God's grace. And so they would receive milk and honey. And so I incorporated that many years ago, and until COVID stopped it, we've done it ever since. I'd like sweeten the milk with honey and you get a little sip. And I didn't know how to incorporate this liturgically. In the sources of the early church, they just talked about it happening like after Eucharist. Okay, so I did it right after the distribution of communion, but before the prayer of Thanksgiving. Okay, well, how do you actually do it? I assumed it should be kind of similar to Eucharist, but not trying to look exactly like Eucharist. And so we worked out a second, come back if you want to, rather than all at the same time, because that got a little too strange. But if you wanted to come back, you could. And so I had a little chalice. And again, just the sort of liturgist that I am, I felt like it needed something. When you give someone the bread, body of Christ, bread of heaven. When somebody takes the wine, the blood of Christ, the cup of salvation. Well, milk and honey, I'm not trying to say it's the body and blood of Christ, because it's not. And I'm not trying to say it should stand equal with those, because it shouldn't. It's just something different and something else. And I came up with that verse from Psalm 34. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Because that's what they're doing. The goodness of God as symbolized through the milk and the honey, as pointing to the overabundance of God's graciousness in his kingdom. Our cups overflow. And I don't know when that struck me as a good idea, but we've used it ever since. And it just seems to fit as far as I'm concerned. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Experience the grace of God firsthand in an as tangible way as possible, so that we might know, not just intellectually or philosophically, but very personally and very deeply, just how good God is. So sweet milk isn't, that amazing, but any little element that might connect us in some new way seems like it, it may be worthwhile, which is kind of what I get out of a lot of this particular chapter. Coming from the tradition that he did, Tozer would be very much in favor of a rigorous scriptural education. He would want his people to read the Bible, know the Bible, understand theology personally, not just, sit in a pew, or it wasn't just for the clergy or the academic elites, but he would want people to have a lot of content. But this whole chapter is, again, pushing the theme that the content is not enough, that there needs to be some very personal connection, almost a tangible connection, that our emotions and our feelings are not bad things, as unreliable as they can be, but that is a part of how God desires to relate to us, because he built us with our minds and our emotions.
Do you do that, milk and honey at all? Service?
No,
Just. the
Great Easter Vigil.
yearly.
Great Easter Vigil. Because to my knowledge, that's where it came from in the early church. And so, part of it was, this is a really cool thing that I came across, that they did that. Like, oh, that really seems interesting and worthwhile. And anything to set that service a little bit apart. If you're willing to get up at 6:30 in the morning out in the dark, then reap the benefits, whatever that might be. So I was just looking for something for that particular service. Okay, so even though everything we've been talking about so far has just been really about that one verse and just kind of extrapolating outward, as we look through these first few paragraphs, we're all it's all sort of leading in the same place. He talks about the inferential character of contemporary faith, and by that, by inference. So inference is what I think about something. Implication is what something or someone tries to get me to think about it. So to infer means to take an educated guess, to look at the evidence supplied and formulate an opinion. So what do you think he's talking about in kind of a broad sense about inference and contemporary faith?
Saying that they don't go very much beyond just someone telling them, maybe.
Okay, they don't go beyond somebody telling them.
There isn't anything very solid
Okay, nothing very solid.
to it.
Okay, what else?
Ask that question again, please.
So what about contemporary faith is he suggesting is kind of founded on inference, on the educated guess? And why is that an issue?
I think he's warning us against stopping with just head knowledge, and that we need experience with the person of God to really begin to know him.
Yes, yeah. So an inference is not explicit.
And there's lots of scholars that write around the intellectual knowledge of it, but it is not a relationship with God.
Right, sure.
And I can give an example of that. When I first was, well, I don't even know if I was walking with Christ at the time, but we talk about God as love, and I wasn't grasping that. And I read, and I can't even tell you what it is, but it's a New Age classes about love and all kinds of issues that are in the Bible. But when I read that, I got an intellectual understanding, which later allowed me to have a real experience with the Lord and a heart understanding, but I sure didn't know him when I read and understood the intellectual part of it.
Right. Right. That I don't think Tozer is dismissing or discounting the intellectual knowledge. I would be shocked if he actually thought that way, because again, just knowing his background, this was a church tradition that really valued right knowledge, knowing stuff. But it's the stopping there. So I'm taking this as his critique is, Christians who basically say, the concept of God fits the evidence. The creator is obviously, there's stuff all around, and why is there something rather than nothing, and the good things that happen in my life, and the Bible makes sense to me, or whatever it is. And so their knowledge of God is kind of inferential, and their relationship is therefore it's based off of inference. Inferences are not explicit. That's maybe the biggest thing about this. An inference, like an implication, is all about the subtext. It's all about making assumptions one way or the other. And you can be right, an inference can be 100% correct, but it's not explicitly articulated. It's typically quietly done, but it's basically an educated guess. I'm going to make an assumption of what you think or who you are based off of your tone of voice, or the way you're dressed, or you said this thing to me, but I can put two and two together. I can read between the lines, and I can figure out that such and such. That's the inference. So he is, basically critiquing having this knowledge and then kind of just extrapolating everything else from there. If you have ever, asked about a friend of a friend, someone that you don't know but somebody else does, and they give you about a 2-sentence statement about this person, and sometimes you go, okay, I know who they are now, but do you really? Maybe the picture that grows in your mind is correct, but maybe it's not. Have you actually met that person?
You don't really know a person until you've had experiences, shared experiences with them.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
You can identify them from the person's description, but you don't know them.
Yes. Right. So I'm not one for being particularly interested in the lives of celebrities. But there is something about our contemporary celebrity culture that implies, this is the opposite direction, the implication is we know them. You have some kind of relationship with this person you see in a movie, on TV, online, whatever it is. And their popularity is often based off of that kind of sense of rapport. So-and-so isn't just a talented actor, but you kind of feel like you know it. The way they give their interviews, or the way they seem very charming on a show, or whatever it is.
Whenever.
But do you really know them? And the answer is no, you definitely don't.
When they're playing a role, they play the role to fit the person.
Sure.
And you don't know whether, when they're themselves, whether they're playing a role.
Right. Have you ever seen somebody, they seem pretty good in this movie or this show or whatever, and then you watch an interview with Matt the Fact, and their accent is 100% different. And just like not just a little bit, like, oh my gosh. Yeah, it's very disconcerting, right? Because a good actor really tries to embody that role, and who they are as a person is, relatively obscure, if they do it right. But then you have other actors, and it's like no matter what role they're in, they seem to be themselves. But that's the sort of person you kind of wind up feeling like but I don't think that you do. The coach of your favorite team that you see on this, ranting and raving on the sidelines, or you see an interview about, there was a time and a place where I knew some of the coaches on staff at UF, or at least I had met them. And now it's been a long, long time. I can develop a guess about how they are based off of interviews and watching on the sidelines, stuff like that. And I have opinions. I like so-and-so, but I didn't like the other one. But ultimately, that's an inference on my part, because I have not really met these folks. And if I was sitting in a room with them for a day, I might have a very different opinion. For those
Like-
of you, go ahead, Pat.
Like Tiger Woods. We all feel like we know him.
Especially after all this time, he's been an important sports figure for like 25 years now, 30 almost. Yeah, it definitely feels like some of these folks, but we really don't. So this is not intended to be unkind. I like this guy a lot, but our retired Bishop John Howe here in Central Florida, if you're here long enough to have met him,
Yeah.
he's a very strong preacher. He's a very articulate teacher. He has a kind of a commanding presence about him. You stick that poor guy in a small group with 3 people and he won't say a word. He'll stare at his shoes. He is super uncomfortable in small groups. But you put him in front of a large group or the podium or whatever, and you assume he's like just this larger than life personality. But you get him like in intimate settings, and he is, it's a very different person. Very different. It's not one of the reasons why, but it's one of the, kind of broader elements of, I really detest the concept of celebrity within the church. I think celebrity in general is a poison, but in the church, it's a dangerous poison, because it not only poisons the celebrity themselves, it convinces pastors that we're smarter and better and holier than we really are. It takes our eyes off Jesus and puts it back in our own lives, but it also leads other people in dangerous places.
Yeah.
Putting their trust in the wrong person and not in the Lord, that kind of thing. Well, with the way our lives are so interconnected through media and online, all sorts of people will say, oh, so-and-so is my pastor. You live 5 states away and you've never met this person. And even if you did, they could not pick you out of a lineup.
Yeah.
So that person's not your pastor. Sorry.
No.
Now, they could be a great preacher. This could be like a good person, like, a genuinely holy disciple of Christ intending to do the right thing. But the pastorate, the shepherding, you can't shepherd from a distance. Shepherds are there with sheep. The good shepherds and the bad shepherds, they're still with sheep. So it's just a different kind of ministry. I don't want to denigrate it fully to say it's worthless. I'm just saying we have to put it in its right place. Like, okay, I learned so-and-so, a lot from this teacher who I watched their online stuff, and they gave me a lot of good content. But the pastoral role, that's like calling somebody a friend that you've never met. I've never actually met this person, but they're my friend. Well, maybe they are, but maybe they're not. All of this is just kind of embellishing what Tom has already said. You have to experience time with someone before you actually know them. That includes God, is what Mary Lou said, and I think that's the heart of this this whole chapter, if not the whole book, really, right? Because we've been kind of all around this subject in the other chapters too. Knowing about God versus knowing God personally, and the difference that those two things can be. That is one of the great risks of the clergy. We, if we're not stupid, have kind of an ingrained concern that we don't get so busy doing the Lord's work that we wander far away from the Lord himself.
Yeah.
There are ministers too that have been ministers for years, and they confess all of a sudden that they finally have found the Lord.
Yeah.
And I mean, that blew my mind when I heard that the first time.
Yeah, I've got a colleague who in this diocese, he's retired now, but he'll give you testimony about that. And it's not done out of malice. It's not done out of being a con man or anything, but it's about like, I didn't even know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I had enough, but then when the door was actually opened, it's like I've been living my whole life in a very small room, and the outside was then opened up to me.
But don't you think that's sort of true of everybody, is you have a deeper relationship with the Lord?
You're absolutely right. It is completely true. I would just say there's a different risk for clergy because of the assumptions.
Sure.
We assume we're already set, and everybody else reinforces that assumption. If a random parishioner says, well, I just had this very deeply beautiful and powerful spiritual experience, and I feel like I know the Lord for the first time in a brand new way, everyone's like, hooray, you let a clergy person say that, and everybody is up in arms like, what do you mean for the first time? What have you been doing all this? Like, and I'm not saying that's not wrong. I'm just saying
I just said that.
it's sort of just a different,
Acceptance.
the stakes feel a little different.
It could be a shock.
But it should, I mean, it can be true to anyone and everyone.
Sure.
The quote unquote professional, though, not only do others assume everything is all squared away, but you kind of have to operate as though it is, because you got stuff to do, good, bad, or indifferent. You got stuff to do. And the busyness of stuff, but this is not a purely spiritual phenomenon. There are a lot of things that are important to us, but when we get bogged down in the details, we lose why we're doing it in the first place. This is the parent who is either doing stuff all the time on behalf of their child. They're not actually spending time with the child. This is with a spousal relationship where they're one of them gets so consumed with the details or the effort or the work that the actual bond there is tested. People who are in the middle of some kind of pursuit, a hobby or a vocation or a job. Like, I used to love this, but now I'm so busy doing stuff about it, I don't even like it anymore. I always, and I still do, love history, reading, studying, thinking about history, but I very purposefully didn't want to get a degree in history because I was afraid as soon as I was forced to do it, I would learn to hate it. And a part of that's my own weird temperament, but I think there's also a little common humanity there. Any endeavor that you get excited about, maybe this is just me. There's I'm a project person who's always got projects going, and I'll be really enthusiastic and very excited, and the project's starting and rolling, and there comes a point somewhere between the halfway mark and the 2/3 mark of every project that I do where I've decided I hate this project and I wish I'd never started. And you just got to push through until you finish. But it seems like every project I hit that point, like, why did I do this? And the busyness of trying to fulfill a goal starts obscuring the desirability of the goal itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So let me connect this to something kind of broader that I think he's talking about. The title of the chapter, Apprehending God. What does that mean, to apprehend something?
Capture them.
To capture it, to grab it, to grasp it. You pursued something and you caught it. It's not just understanding, it's capturing. And again, if the whole title of this book is The Pursuit of God, and what is the goal? What is the end point? What is the telos of pursuit? It's capture. You know, what happens when the dog finally catches the car? You know, they don't know what to do with it, but they can't help but chase it. If we're pursuing fellowship and relationship to God, there is a goal in mind. Oh, but the journey is the important part. Well, kind of, but the purpose of the journey in the first place is why you started.
The one thing that came to me with this, and I guess it's one of the things I struggle with a lot, is the capturing of God. I know my name is written in the golden book. However, if I don't stay captured with God, will I stay there? And I know I will, but it goes back again to that. The more you know you don't know. And the more you walk with the Lord, the more you want to walk with the Lord. And then all of us, at least for me, all of a sudden, some days I say, well, where are you? Because that in itself is vanity.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's
One-
the who feel satisfied with their knowledge of a situation who tend to be revealing how little they know.
Once you have established a best friend relationship with God, there is no end point. If you have a best friend, you just continue to enjoy
Yes,
that relationship.
yes.
That's a good point.
Yeah, Tom
There's no
Stick-
end point.
That's a
So
good point.
this is just 100% true. A best friend, there's not an end point. Like we've achieved 100% capacity of friendship. No, because the more you do with them, the more that friendship grows. It continues to grow. It gets bigger. It gets deeper. It enriches, whatever it is. I don't know which chapter it was where I mentioned that song from the late 60s, early 70s, I think early 70s. I love you more today than yesterday, but not as much tomorrow. That idea of you can love somebody fully and completely, as much as you possibly can. Your capacity to love them will actually grow and deepen the more you're with them. Like say a spouse or your children. Like I can't love you any more than I love you right now, except of course, 10 years from now, if we still keep doing
I
this,
do.
your best gets better.
Yeah.
I tell this to the martial arts kids all the time when we're practicing a technique and they're kind of just sort of flopping around with it. I'm like, if you push up against the envelope of your ability, like if you do your best every time, what you're going to find out is that your best gets better.
Yeah.
Like I tried to do this as fast as I could, this one punch, as fast and as accurate as I could. And I did 100 times. And then I come back the next day, my ability to move quickly and with purpose has actually increased because of the practice. And that doesn't mean that I was doing it less before. I was doing it to my best, but I am able to continue to grow in my abilities if I will test them.
That's true.
So we had a little, I don't know, I almost said digression, but maybe it's not. Maybe maybe you'll catch this one differently. But as he started talking about reality, this was kind of not quite the halfway point, or maybe it was the halfway point of the chapter, but talking about reality. He's using it to start talking, kind of categorizing people, the idealists, the relativists, the absolutists, the materialists, and this kind of thing. So if you had any sticking points there, did anyone have any spot where they weren't quite sure what he was getting at or what some of these terms meant? It is a little philosophical, but it's relatively applied.
It brought me back to when I first, as an adult, was walking with the Lord. And I was attending a Presbyterian church, and I knew many of the parishioners intimately. And I used to look around at church on Sunday and see the deacons and all these people that were involved. And then I would think about when I see them in the world the rest of the time. And it brought a lot of questions to mind.
Okay.
And that's what I thought he was describing there. And I mean, through the years, I've learned to be less judgmental and to see it more through the Lord's eyes, that everybody's different, everybody is human, and everybody serves the Lord at a different place, as do we ourselves. If we're not standing still, and I don't think any Christian ever tries to stand still, they're always trying to grow deeper into the Lord. But that's what came out for me when I was reading that part of the chapter.
Yeah. So as just sort of a foundational definition, it may be worthwhile to give a very succinct definition of reality. And this is going to sound a little too simple or too vague, but I think it's about the best I've heard. This is not unique to me. I didn't make this up, but it's about the best I've heard because of its usefulness, not in so much containing the idea, but by implication. Reality is, quote unquote, that which is. That's it.
Yeah.
That which is. That's reality. And so people, especially when they, sophomores in philosophy, will start arguing about, what is real and, the Cartesian dualism and all this kind of stuff. Do we live in the matrix? Is this all the simulation? Whatever. But just kind of the simple pocket, but still foundational definition of reality is that which is. Now, our senses allow us to perceive reality and to interact with it, what we touch and what we smell and taste and everything like that. And we all kind of go off of the reliability of our senses. And that's one of the critiques we'll have is like the people who talk about, what do you call them? Is that maybe the relativist or something like that, that the materialist and the relativist, the only thing there is the natural world, it's the material world, and there is no supernatural, there's no spirit and all this kind of stuff. And he kind of reminds them that they've got a way too limited a view. So we all act as though our senses tell us something worthwhile and reliable. Everybody. Nobody walks purposefully into walls and slams their fingers into doors repeatedly because they don't believe it's meaningful. No. I'm pretty sure that's a wall that I'm walking into, and it will hurt if I do, so I don't do it, right? This is somebody was making, this is like an old college, I'm a moral relativist, and everything is all about context, and everything is, you know, what's good for me or good at the time, or what's true for you is not necessarily true for me, except nobody is a moral relativist when they look at their bank account. Everybody wants it to be absolutely correct. And if the bank is like, oh, you got no money in there, like, no, I should have this amount of money in my bank account. And the bank says, well, that's true for you, but not necessarily for us. Like, oh no, now suddenly reality is very concrete. But when he gets into this point about reality and imagination and everything else, this is the wider point that I think he's trying to make. Our senses tell us something worthwhile and reliable about that which is reality, but it doesn't tell us everything. Our senses, though helpful, are not comprehensive. And by that, I mean, you know, what we perceive, for instance, as solid. I've got my hand on a table. This is one of those resin tables, and I can kind of feel the temperature. I can feel the texture. I can kind of feel a little bit of pliability to it. But if I were able to zoom in to the sub-microscopic level, to a subatomic level, what I perceive as solid is not solid. Even matter has all of this space in between the atoms, an enormous, by percentage and proportion, amount of space. So what are we feeling when we feel something solid? We're feeling incredibly small bits of stuff in wide open areas coming close to other little bits of stuff in incredibly wide open areas. Is it the repelling magnetic fields? You know, whatever it is, but our senses are telling us something worthwhile and valid, but not everything. Our eyes are not showing us all of the range of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, certain animals or certain insects would be in the same room and see things that we don't see. Dogs smell things we don't smell.
Hear things too.
They hear things we can't hear. And that's even if your hearing's pretty good. And for most of us, it's not as good as it used to be. There is all sorts of things that are happening around us. You know, we're being bombarded with cosmic rays. We have no perception of this. There are certain foods that some people lack the ability to taste, or, you know, it tastes differently from one person to the next. Cilantro tastes like soap to some people, and to others, it has kind of a lemony, spicy taste. And it all kind of depends on your genetic makeup. Your senses are telling us, we would say, valid things about reality, but just not everything. And where you get into trouble is where you assume it's telling you everything. If, and I believe this is his major argument at the conclusion of the chapter, if we are open to perceiving it, this is kind of like, and all the heavens declare the glory of God. You know, there is a spiritual world all around us. And just because we can't see it, or smell it, or hear it, or even feel it, doesn't mean it's not real. And there may be ways where we can experience it, but it doesn't always happen in our narrow field of operation. But if we kind of close ourselves off to what I'm seeing, feeling, smelling, all this kind of stuff right here, right now, well, that's it. well, then we will miss something very significant and essential. The object of our belief, of our faith, of our lives as Christians, he says, is this reality that we can't even see. But it is. Remember, if reality is that which is, whether we can see it or perceive it or not, doesn't change it. It simply is. We just have the tendency to wrap up reality with our notion of what we perceive.
And be satisfied.
And be satisfied. And be convinced. It just isn't always the case. We are citizens of a heavenly kingdom. And that is a kind of an esoteric concept to try to think through. But if we stay with the practical of what we do have a better connection to, if we consider that concept, we've got a decent understanding of what it means to be citizens of a country. And we might have different opinions on it. We might have a different, perceptions or priorities, but we all kind of have a sense about what it means to be a citizen of this country, of a different country, whatever. Citizenship implies rights. It implies responsibilities. It implies geographical location. It implies family status. It implies what else?
Loyalty.
Loyalty. I'd say there's a lot of other things that it implies culture, it implies identity, it implies
Freedom.
freedom. There's all these elements that to be a citizen of a country, even if it's different for different people, exactly what it means. There's a lot of this stuff wrapped into it that we all sort of assume, okay, to be a citizen of, Canada versus a citizen of the US. And there's a lot of crossover there, but there's some things we're going to think are different.
Yes.
Off the top of your head, what's fair, unfair, true, or untrue? What's the difference between a citizen of Canada and a citizen of the United States?
Their education system is different.
Their educational system is different. So
The
that means
medical
better
system's
educated or worse educated.
Yeah.
They're just different. Okay, they're used to the socialized medical care, which is different than what we do. What else?
Their travel requirements are different.
Okay, how so? Like the COVID travel requirements?
Well, but they can come for 6 months to another country, but they have to go back to their country
Okay.
To keep their citizenship.
Yeah, I always came across if you were an American abroad and you ever get into a dicey situation and they ever say where you're from, don't say you're from America, say you're from Canada. Why?
They're
Because
local.
nobody hates the Canadians. That's the thought. Like if you're in a foreign country and the situation gets a little tense, where are you from? Well, you can pull off Canada because Canada and the US, yes, there are some accent differences or whatever, but if you're someplace across the world, they're not gonna know.
But
But
if you have to
nobody
prove
hates the Canadians, but they might hate the Americans, right? So when we think about, at least when I think about Canada, I think about how nice they are and maple syrup and cold, right? Like you're used to the cold weather because you're Canadian.
I thought you said COAL.
No. And so not every Canadian is nice, and not every nice Canadian is nice all the time. And some of them don't like cold weather. And I'm sure there's some of them who don't like maple syrup, but we kind of have this, kind of conglomeration in our mind. And, just because you were born in the geographical confines of Canada doesn't necessarily mean that all these things are true. But we kind of have that lumped together because we understand that there is a sense of identity within citizenship, even if it's not perfectly matched with every person. but there is something to it. To be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven has by implication rights, responsibility, family stuff, culture, identity, privilege. Except you don't have a passport that reads heaven. You know, this is C.S. Lewis talking about a country that we've never visited, a tune that we've never heard, the scent of a flower that we've never encountered, but it still connects to us somehow. We still resonate with it. It still strikes us deep in our hearts in some way that's difficult to articulate, but we know it's important. So even if we are using all of our senses, we are not always going to be able to perceive everything that's real, everything that's important, or everything that's significant. Our spiritual lives with God and one another, we may not have any direct vision of. It may all be indirect. But there's a lot of things in life that you can't measure directly. This is Billy Graham's, you can't see the wind, but you can see the effects of the wind. Can you measure and quantify love? What is the metric unit of love? You know, what is the metric unit of freedom or liberty or justice or peace? Or all these things that we think are significant, they're important, they're real, but they're not measurable in that way. They're comparable, but they're not measurable. Not in an objective metric standard. But it doesn't mean they're not only not real, it doesn't mean they're not incredibly significant. And he's wrapping up with this reminder that if we can kind of retune our perceptions to take in some of this unseen, to be open to some of this outside of what we can practically visualize, it's going to change our perceptions. I dare say we're getting back to, if you keep trying your best gets better. The more we look to take in this unseen reality, maybe the more we'll be able to perceive it. And the more we perceive it, the more we might be able to see there's even more than we first thought.
We become more tolerant.
Certainly so.
More accepting. And there's dangers in that. Another sermon.
Yeah, well, you know, we are commended to put our heart and our treasures in things that last and not in things that don't. All we know are the things that don't. Like physically, practically, personally. Because the stuff that lasts is, again, it's this outer world, it's this reality that is, we just can't really measure it, we can't really perceive it through our sight or through our smell, but it doesn't mean it's not of eternal significance. Okay, what else?
When I
That-
get worried
Go
and
Come on, Marion.
concerned about some of the things, I always go back to the time that I was in a very I wouldn't call it a desperate place, but a really strong yearning for the Lord. And a couple of different times that I was out in nature walking and he just engulfed me. And I always think about that to remind me God is right here holding me up through every situation and every moment. I just have to open myself to the feeling of it and the knowing of it.
Yeah.
I'm the one that's blocking it. He's here.
And that's real, that capital R real, that which is, what happened was significant, it was important, and it was real.
It amazes me when I am working with something and I think, oh, it's just gone all wrong. And I might just as well give up on it. Turn around and after a period, I won't say how long, but anyway, all of a sudden, it all works.
There it is. Yeah,
Thank you, Lord.
yeah. Mom, did you have something?
I was just going to make a comment on that definition of reality, that which is, people who say they don't believe in God because I can't see him, I can't touch him, I can't hear him, whatever. Yet when he talked to Moses in the burning bush, he says, well, who should I say sent me? I am.
Right.
It's just the state of being.
Yes.
I am. So he is, and that makes him real.
The most real.
Mhm.
All of reality flows from that, from him. Yep.
What-
I like that, Mary.
One comment that helped me, I guess, was they were talking about the other world. We say we're working towards a place in the other world, wanting to be with God, and that that is not in the future. That is in the present. It is how we are living right now.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, it may not be to its fullness, it may not be to its consummation, but it doesn't mean it has to be only understood as some far-flung future. And that's Jesus telling the people that he's talking to, the kingdom of heaven is here upon you. It's not just something you're waiting for. Our not just our ability to perceive and understand it, our ability to be in fellowship with it is it's imperfect, it's impaired, but even that can keep growing, but it's here and now. It's never just pie in the sky and the by and by. Okay, anything else? Okay, well, I'm all set then for us to meet next Wednesday during Holy Week, and that's perfectly fine. I'll be here anyway. So we'll plan on that, and then we will let's just take that next week off. I still don't know what my schedule is going to look like, but because it's potentially, what if I'm on the road or whatever? And I already said I could Zoom up from somewhere else, and everybody seems to be okay with just taking the week off. So just so you know, the week after Holy Week is referred to technically as Easter week. So we'll take off the Wednesday in Easter week. Okay?
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a good
Bye.
day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.